The year is 1967. A squad of American soldiers moves cautiously through the suffocating jungle, sweat stinging their eyes. Every step, a gamble. Suddenly, a hidden cartridge trap detonates, sending a bullet tearing through a soldier's foot. Panic grips the group, but there's no time to stop. Just ahead, a punji pit waits like a silent predator, its sharpened spikes eager to maim. Beneath them, an unseen labyrinth. The Cu Chi tunnels stretches for miles where the enemy watches and waits. How did the Viet Cong turn the very earth into a weapon? Join us as we uncover the most horrific traps of the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was one of the most divisive and haunting conflicts of the 20th century. While it played out as a Cold War showdown between communist North Vietnam and the US-backed South, another, more insidious battle raged in the shadows. The Viet Cong, masters of guerrilla warfare, didn't need tanks or fighter jets to strike fear into their enemies. They relied on something far more sinister: booby traps. Crafted from bamboo, spikes, and salvaged explosives, these deceptively simple yet brutal devices turned the jungle into a living nightmare for American troops. Though crude in design, they proved devastatingly effective against the might of the US military, transforming the very landscape into a battlefield of unseen horrors. Soldiers never knew when or where the next trap would strike. Every step could be their last, and the relentless uncertainty took a devastating psychological toll. The invisible enemy beneath their feet eroded their nerves, turning the jungle into a waking nightmare. The weight of constant vigilance drained them, leaving troops physically exhausted and mentally fractured. In this way, the war was not just fought with bullets and bombs. It was a battle against fear itself. As Sun Tzu famously said, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." The Viet Cong understood this all too well. For the Viet Cong, survival meant adaptation. They couldn't outmatch US forces in firepower or technology, so they fought with something far more insidious: brutal, low-cost tactics that drained the enemy's morale and resources. As their strategic mastermind, General Von Nguyen Giap put it, "We fight the enemy where he is strong with a tactic that is cheap for us and expensive for him." Booby traps became the ultimate embodiment of this philosophy. Simple, sinister, and devastatingly effective. Military historian Spencer C. Tucker described it best. The Viet Cong's extensive use of booby traps and mines was one of the most characteristic features of the Vietnam War. Picture this: you're deep in the jungle, rifle gripped tight, heart hammering in your chest. The air is thick, humid. Each breath feels heavy. Sweat trickles down your forehead as you place each step with painstaking caution. Then, snap, a click beneath your boot. Before you can react, boom! The ground erupts, a mine leaps into the air. A heartbeat later, detonation. Shrapnel explodes outward, searing through flesh, slicing through everything in its path. The blast is so powerful it hurls you off your feet, pain flooding every nerve. This was the Bouncing Betty, also known as the S-mine, a soldier's worst nightmare. Unlike conventional mines, the Bouncing Betty wasn't just designed to maim, it was engineered to destroy. Buried just below the surface, it was triggered by pressure or a tripwire, setting off a small internal explosion that launched the main charge waist-high before detonating. The result, a lethal burst of razor-sharp metal, tearing through legs, lower bodies, anything in its path. But what was it really like to face one? Richard Dieterle, a soldier with the 1st Battalion 8th Cavalry Regiment, recalled the sheer devastation. The blast was so powerful, it perforated at least one of the eardrums. The shrapnel sprayed in every direction and low to the ground. A study from the US Army Surgeon General's office revealed a grim reality. 82% of American soldiers wounded by mines and booby traps in Vietnam suffered injuries to their legs or feet. But the wounds weren't just physical. The unseen toll, the mental terror, was just as crippling. Every step became a gamble. Every patch of dirt a potential death trap. Would this step be the last? Punji sticks were one of the most notorious and the most dreaded traps in the Vietnam War. They were sharpened bamboo or metal spikes concealed in camouflaged pits, often hidden beneath rice paddies or thin coverings, sometimes even in the middle of the jungle. A soldier walking through the dense terrain might step forward, only to feel a sudden searing pain as the spikes drove into his leg. But the physical pain was only the beginning. The Viet Cong often smeared the spikes with feces, urine, or plant toxins, ensuring that even a small wound could fester into a life-threatening infection. These traps weren't designed to kill outright. They were meant to maim, to slow down an entire unit as they struggled to carry their wounded comrade to safety. Every delay, every moment spent tending to an injured soldier made the rest of the unit more vulnerable to attack. There was no safe place. Punji sticks lurked not just in open trails, but near barbed wire, inside tunnels, and in spots where soldiers instinctively took cover during firefights. Some punji pits were designed so that once a soldier fell in, pulling his leg out only made the injury worse. Others were placed side by side, ensuring that anyone rushing to help a fallen comrade would likely become a victim too. According to a 1967 U.S. Army report, punji sticks accounted for 2% of American casualties in Vietnam. But their true impact was far greater than the numbers suggest. These brutal traps didn't just wound bodies, they inflicted fear itself. As one veteran recalled, the thought of stepping on a punji stick was always in the back of your mind. It was a constant source of fear and anxiety. Every rustling leaf, every uneven patch of ground became a potential death trap. The sheer unpredictability of punji pits forced soldiers to move slower, second-guess every step, and live in a state of relentless paranoia. And in war, hesitation could be just as deadly as an ambush. Hand grenades were another deadly staple in the Viet Cong's arsenal. Straightforward, brutal, and devastatingly effective. Their ease of use made them a formidable weapon on the battlefield. The Viet Cong would often rig them to tripwires or hide them inside cans, removing the pins to ensure the blast would go off when triggered. If a soldier accidentally stepped on the wire or disturbed the can, the grenade would detonate, sending shrapnel flying in every direction. These grenade traps were especially brutal in the narrow, suffocating tunnels that snaked beneath the jungles of Vietnam, an underground battlefield where death lurked in the darkness. Armed with only a flashlight and a pistol, the soldiers known as tunnel rats crawled headfirst into these claustrophobic booby-trapped passages, where the very walls could be laced with traps. Every inch forward was a gamble, every breath a prayer. But it wasn't just explosives that made the jungle a nightmare. The Viet Cong also used net traps, designed to ensnare soldiers and leave them utterly helpless. Soldiers would move cautiously through the dense jungle, scanning for hidden dangers when suddenly a concealed mechanism triggered. A net snatched them off their feet, hoisted them into the air, or pinned them against the trees. Trapped, exposed, vulnerable. In that moment, they are sitting targets, unable to escape and at the mercy of an unseen enemy. A Marine Corps report identified cartridge traps as one of the most frequently used booby traps of the war. Simple, deadly, and easy to assemble, with materials readily found in the jungle. All it took was a small bamboo tube, a nail, a piece of wood, and a single round of small arms ammunition. Sometimes known as toe popper, the trap was built by securing the bamboo tube upright on a wooden base and placing a cartridge inside, with the primer resting against the tip of the nail. Once buried along the footpath with the round facing upward, it became a deadly surprise for anyone who stepped on it. The pressure from a soldier's foot forced the cartridge down onto the nail, triggering the round and sending a bullet straight into their foot. It wasn't designed to kill, but to maim. A wounded soldier slowed down an entire unit, forcing his comrades to stop, help, and evacuate him. The Viet Cong took booby traps to another level. They even weaponized nature itself. Poisonous creatures like snakes and scorpions were deliberately placed in high-risk areas where soldiers were most likely to unwittingly stumble into danger. Old weapon caches, tunnel corners, and even ceilings of underground complexes became hiding spots for these living traps, coiled, waiting, ready to strike. But the danger didn't end there. The Viet Cong sometimes carried live snakes in their packs, knowing that if an enemy soldier searched them, they'd be in for a lethal surprise. And these weren't harmless garden snakes. One of the most feared was the bamboo viper, nicknamed Two-Step Charlie, or Three-Step Snakes, because legend had it that once bitten, a soldier wouldn't make it more than a few steps before collapsing. Whether or not the name was exaggerated, the fear it instilled was not. The Viet Cong also targeted food and water supplies. Contaminating these essentials was a way to weaken the enemy from within. The use of chemicals like Agent Blue was part of this strategy, aimed at destroying rice crops and denying the enemy food supplies. One soldier described the experience. "You never knew what was in your food or water. It was like living in a constant state of paranoia." Facing a powerful enemy armed with superior weapons and resources, the Viet Cong had to fight with strategy, not strength. Rather than engaging in direct combat, they took the war underground. Literally, they carved out a vast network of tunnels, stretching tens of thousands of miles beneath cities and jungles. These underground pathways were more than just escape routes. They became the lifeline of the Viet Cong. Soldiers used them to move undetected, transport supplies, and launch surprise attacks. Some tunnels were even outfitted with makeshift theaters and concert halls, a stark contrast to the relentless war raging above. One such network of tunnels was constructed under the Cu Chi district, northwest of Saigon. Stretching over 150 miles from the outskirts of Saigon to the Cambodian border, this labyrinth wasn't built overnight. Originally carved out during the Indochina War, 1946 to 1954 against the French, it was later expanded into a fully operational underground fortress during the Vietnam War. When American bombers screamed across the sky, the Viet Cong didn't run. They vanished beneath the earth, emerging only to ambush, sabotage, and strike back. The tunnels became an engineering marvel and a military nightmare, forcing the U.S. to rethink its approach. Conventional warfare was useless in the suffocating darkness below, so the military trained a special breed of soldier, the tunnel rats. These small, fearless men crawled into the pitch-black, booby-trapped passages, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a pistol. Today, these tunnels have become famous tourist sites. As we remember the soldiers who faced these horrors, we must also acknowledge the relentless suffering they endured. Booby traps were responsible for a significant portion of American casualties, with some estimates suggesting they caused up to 20% of all injuries. Sadly, beyond the physical toll, the war inflicted deep psychological wounds, fueling anxiety, paranoia, and post-traumatic stress disorder long after it had ended. The Viet Cong had turned the very ground into an enemy, making every step a gamble with death. As Sun Tzu famously wrote in The Art of War, "All warfare is based on deception." These traps didn't just maim soldiers, they sowed deep distrust among the local population. Often hidden in civilian areas, they blurred the line between enemy and innocent bystander, fueling suspicion and paranoia. With every step a potential death trap, soldiers found it increasingly difficult to distinguish friend from foe, further complicating an already chaotic war. In the end, the Vietnam War was a conflict like no other, a brutal clash of strategy, survival, and psychological warfare. Its legacy endures, etched into history and told through the harrowing stories of those who lived to remember. Thanks for exploring the dark and deadly tactics of the Vietnam War with us. What do you think about these terrifying war tactics? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping stories from history. And remember, history is full of secrets, and we're here to uncover them.